So this lesson is going to be about transport across the membrane. So in class we've talked about the components of the cell membrane. So this is going to help us to understand how particles get from one side to the other side of the cell membrane. So some key ideas to consider. Substances move in and out of cells. This has to occur in order for cells to live and in order for us to be alive. So you have your cell, substances move in through the cell membrane, substances move out through the cell membrane. So an example would be oxygen moves in, carbon dioxide moves out. Substances can move both passively and actively in and out of the cell. So when we talk about substances moving passively, this means without energy. So no energy is used for it to move in and out. When we talked about moving actively in and out of cells, this means that energy is used, or ATP is used, in order for the substance to move in or out of the cell. And another important idea is the concentration gradient, and this is a concept that we're going to talk a little bit further about. So the concentration gradient is the movement from a high concentration to a low concentration. So when we talk about concentration, we're talking about the amount of a solute in a solution. So solute is the substance that gets dissolved in a solution, and the solvent is the substance that dissolves the solute in the solution. So let's think about iced tea. So we have a glass of iced tea. We actually have 2 glasses of iced tea. What we put into our water is the iced tea powder. So our iced tea powder is going to be our solute. So here's our iced tea powder going into our glass. That is our solute. We put the iced tea mix into water. So the water is dissolving the solute, so it's dissolving the iced tea, which means water is then our solvent. Now in our other glass of iced tea, we're going to have less iced tea powder in our water. So we would say then that this glass of iced tea is less concentrated, or it has less solute, than this glass of iced tea, which is going to be more concentrated, or it has more solute. So when we're talking about concentration, we are talking about the amount of solute dissolved in the solvent, which makes the solution. So passive transport is the transport that we're going to focus on today, and it is the movement of particles across a cell membrane without the use of energy. So no energy is used in order to get particles across the membrane, which means it's passive. There's 3 types of passive transport. There's diffusion, facilitated transport, and osmosis. And again, all these types of passive transport do not use energy in order to transfer particles across the membrane. So the first type of passive transport is diffusion, and diffusion is the random movement of particles down the concentration gradient. When we say down the concentration gradient, we are referring to moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. So the particles are going to diffuse from where there is a lot to a little. And this can occur in both directions. So let's look at our diagram. On this side, we see that there are a lot of particles. So this side has a high concentration, and this side has a fewer, so there's going to be a low concentration. And if diffusion is moving down the concentration gradient, we know we're going from the high to the low. So the particles are moving through the membrane from high concentration to low concentration. An example of diffusion would be oxygen and carbon dioxide, like we discussed before. Easily diffusing through the membrane into our cells would be oxygen, because we have less oxygen in our cells. And out of our cells would be the carbon dioxide, because there's less carbon dioxide on the outside of our cells. The second type of transport is facilitated transport, and this is the diffusion of particles through a transmembrane protein down the concentration gradient. Now, down the concentration gradient, again, high concentration to low concentration. And the brackets here means concentration. So that's how I'm going to write it for shorthand for now. So we said diffusion of particles through a transmembrane protein. So there must, in order for particles in facilitated transport to get through, you must use a transmembrane protein. So either a channel protein or a carrier protein. Now the key here again is no energy is used. So not to get confused when we talk about carrier proteins later with active transport, because right now we're talking about facilitated transport, and facilitated transport uses no energy. So the particles are going to diffuse through the channel proteins or the carrier proteins to the inside of the cell where there is less concentration. So it's going from high to low concentration. Some reasons why they may use transmembrane proteins is that the molecule could be too big, or it could be a polar molecule, and from what we know about the phospholipid bilayer, the inside of the cell membrane is the nonpolar fatty acid chains, which are hydrophobic. So if you have a polar substance trying to get in, it needs a channel in order to get through the nonpolar tails of the cell membrane. An example of facilitated transport would be glucose. Glucose is too big to get through the cell membrane, and it needs a transmembrane protein in order to move it into cells in order for us to have energy. The third type of passive transport is osmosis, and this is a little bit different than the other two in the way that it is passive diffusion of water down a water concentration gradient. So not to be confused from what we were talking before, a water concentration gradient, we are talking about water, not the solute. So passive of water down a water concentration gradient would be from a high water concentration, that's what the brackets mean, to a low water concentration. So in this example here, we have our water molecules, and we could have particles as well. And the water is going to move from the high concentration on this side to the lower water concentration on this side. And eventually it will even itself out. Now the reason why we're talking about the water is because you may have a semi-permeable membrane and some solutes may not be able to get through, and water is permeable to membranes, so it can easily get through. So that's why we talk about osmosis, passive diffusion of water down a water concentration gradient. Now, an example that happens every day would be the reabsorption of water in your large intestines.